it's early. But what better way to start your day than by getting free legal advice? This is Vastola on the Law with your host, attorney Jeff Vastola, featuring 30 minutes of free legal advice. Call in now with your questions. 877-850-8585. That's 877-850-8585. Now here's your host, attorney Jeff Vastola.
Jeff Vastola, your host, and I am in a remote location today, so apologies early on for any sound issues that we may have, and obviously apologies to those that like to watch by Facebook Live, because this connection is not allowing me to do Facebook Live, unfortunately, but this was experimental, so we'll work through it. Today, I am up in the Palm Coast. My son has a soccer tournament up here, and instead of running a replay, I decided to go ahead and try this, and hopefully it works. Sharina, you with me so far? Good deal. So today we're going to be talking about, and I know I sound like a broken record, but the insurance options that are available for people in the state of Florida that drive vehicles. It's unfortunate when things happen and people realize that they don't have good forms of coverage that were available, because there's nothing you can do to fix that retroactively. You need to be very proactive with your automobile insurance. And something happened in the last week, very close to home, very good friends of mine, that I just feel compelled to talk about this issue again, because I guess it never hurts to talk about it one more time. If you'd like to be a part of this program, you can dial 877-850-8585. That will get you live into the show with me. Sharina will take your call. We will put you live on the air. And just make sure to mind your P's and Q's so that you're not giving us the name of the person it is that has done you wrong and you want to sue and you want to drag through the mud, that kind of thing. If you'd like to talk to me privately about a case that you think I might want to take, then use my cell phone. My cell phone number, it's a number that forwards to my cell phone, is 833-VASTOLA, which is my last name, V as in Victor, A-S-T-O-L-A. Now, 833-827-8652, and that will go to my cell phone. I will either answer the phone, or you can leave me a message, and I will call you back as soon as I possibly can, and that's an excellent way for us to talk about a case. You can also email me at jvastola@vastolalegal.com. You can go to my website to find out more about us, me and our practice areas, and some of our accomplishments. We're not the firm that's bragging all over the billboards about our results, but similar to those law firms that do, we do have some very, we're proud of some of our results with, at the same time, maintaining some level of humility. So if you're interested in talking to me about a case, personal injury, wrongful death, medical malpractice, then feel free to reach out in any one of those ways. I have office locations in Palm Beach Gardens and Stewart, and I represent clients throughout the state of Florida. And if you have a question, or if you want some free legal advice, and it's in an area that I don't handle week in and week out, Monday through Friday, then I'm going to encourage you to call the radio show. And I'm doing that because if you don't call the radio show and contact me during the week, I'm very reluctant to take time out of my work week to respond to free legal questions that should be handled on the radio show, because frankly, during the week, I need to be working for my clients. So with respect, those that have reached out to me more than once during the week who are not contacting the radio show, I would just ask that you please do that. And of course, it's free legal advice, and it's meant to be accurate advice. If you ask me something right here, right now, and I know the answer, then I will give you the answer to that question. But if you ask me a question and I do not know the answer to that question on the radio show, then I'll do the research that I have to do, and I'll get back to you the following week with what I consider to be an educated response to the question. So, kicking off the show today, as I mentioned, we've got the different types of insurance coverage that are available. And I also wanted to mention this at the outset. and I was going to hold this up to the camera and show everybody that would be watching on Facebook Live, but the Florida courts are asking for $16 million to help clear up the pandemic backlog. And in the article, it cites that there is now a current backlog because of the pandemic alone of over 990,000 cases in the state of Florida alone. This is just the state of Florida. So we haven't had a jury trial since March, leading up until this week, one that really mattered anyway. So there was already a backlog before the pandemic ever became a household name. What happened was, by not having any jury trials since March of this year, it has jammed up an additional almost 1 million cases that are going to have to find judges time in the next year or two to get that backlog cleared up. Now, maybe there's a silver lining in all of this, because we've been dealing with a backlog in the court system for the last 40 years. So if they can figure out a way to clear up the backlog from the pandemic, maybe they can find out a way to clear up the backlog from just a lot of cases being filed over these many, many years. That would be fantastic, because when a client comes to see me in my office for, say, a car accident, and they always ask the question, how long is this going to take? Which is a fair question. My response is, look, we're not going to file your lawsuit today, but even if we were, it's going to take us at least 1.5 to 2 years to get to a trial. That's what I would tell clients before the pandemic. Since the pandemic, I really don't have an answer for my clients, because up until this past week, we have not had a jury trial, at least one that was a standard jury trial since this week. And I wanted to talk about this. Unfortunately, I did not get through to my friend to find out what the result was, but I actually know quite well a lawyer in Stuart, Florida, that tried a 1-week jury trial in front of Judge Sweet in the Stuart Courthouse this past week. And as far as I know, that is the very first jury trial in the state of Florida, a trial that I would consider to be a standard trial. Now, there have been a couple of other jury trials. There was one down in Miami, but that was purely experimental. They were trying to figure out how Zoom was going to work with jury selection and that kind of thing. And there was one civil jury trial up in the Tallahassee area, but that's not what I would consider to be a standard jury trial, because the plaintiff had obtained a default judgment against the defendant. And so there was no defendant in the courtroom. It was basically a plaintiff presenting a case to a panel of jurors seeking the monetary amount of her award. This jury trial that took place in Martin County this past week was a full-blown, disputed jury trial, civil jury trial, with a plaintiff's lawyer on one side and a defense lawyer on the other side, and I don't know the outcome. So I'm going to keep you all on the edge of your seat, as I am at this moment, to find out how it went. I want to get a full report, and I want to share with everybody how that jury trial went forward. And I'm just kind of a little disappointed that I didn't have a chance to participate in that, because I was hoping to watch firsthand a Zoom jury selection, because frankly, I've never done it. Now, keep in mind, it's not as though there have been no jury trials throughout the state of Florida since March. I'm only talking about civil jury trials, which are personal injury, medical malpractice, wrongful death types of trials. There have certainly been criminal trials, because defendants obviously have a right to a speedy trial. And so because of the pandemic, that was not a basis to avoid a defendant's constitutional right to speedy trial. So my understanding is that the criminal courtrooms stayed somewhat active and were in fact having trials. But nevertheless, our first civil standard jury trial took place this week. So a round of applause. I think that's progress, at least. Now, if you own an automobile in the state of Florida, you really need to know what coverages are available to you and why you should not reject them. I know for some reason it's almost like human nature. When you're presented with something that's going to cost more money, most people say, I don't want it. No thanks, I don't need that. And I think that might be a result of, over time, companies have found that if they offer you a product at a certain price, they can make more money by giving you options that increase the price of whatever it is that they might be trying to sell. Well, that's unfortunate because with insurance, you really shouldn't buy bargain basement insurance. That is a really, really bad idea. And the reason it's a bad idea is because if you're involved in an accident that's deemed to be your fault, your personal assets can be exposed because you didn't protect them with available coverage. And one of the biggest problems in this specific area in Florida is this nomenclature called full coverage. And that's where I have to spend most of my time explaining to people that because their agent told them that they are fully covered, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have all of the coverages that they need. In Florida, there's only two coverages that are required on an automobile policy. Those are personal injury protection benefits and property damage benefits. Understand that an insurance policy is made up of a lot of different types of coverage. Coverage is insurance benefits that are used for different reasons. And in much the same way you can buy a vehicle with options. You know, you can buy a vehicle that comes standard with a steering wheel and a brake pedal, but you know, if you want the leather seats, that's an option. If you want the sunroof, that's an option, that kind of thing. Your basic insurance policy in the state of Florida, the steering wheel and the brake pedal, are personal injury protection and property damage. If you're going to buy an automobile insurance policy in Florida, you cannot buy a policy without those two coverages. Those are the only two that are required. And that's the problem. Because on an insurance policy for an automobile, you can have as many as, I think I counted it up one time, as either 12 or 14 optional types of coverage that most often people ignore. They don't know what it is, they don't want to spend the extra money, they say they don't want it, but they'll say they don't want it without knowing what it is and how it's used. And that's the problem. If you have an agent that is not explaining to you all of the different types of coverage that are available to you for your automobile policy, then you really need to either ask or perhaps find a different agent. And if you're utilizing these 1-800 numbers to procure coverage directly from the insurance company, I strongly recommend that you seek the advice of an independent agent. Even if you want to go ahead and buy that policy eventually, at least get the advice of an agent to say, this is what I recommend you have. And always, 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 because this is what I do Monday through Friday. If you ever call me on my cell phone to say, Jeff, I have a question about insurance, I will take that call all day long because I find it's so, so important. And it's not important to have it and never use it. It's important to have it when you need it. And when you don't have it and you need it, that is a very bitter pill. Because understand, you could have had it. You could have had the coverage. You could have protected your assets, but now you cannot because you can't fix it retroactively. The most important coverage in my mind on an automobile insurance policy, because it's kind of the reason it's the most important coverage in my mind is because it covers all bases, is the uninsured motorist. Now, as a matter of public policy, Florida does not allow you to have uninsured motorist coverage, which protects you financially with money, you, your relatives, anybody in your car as well, guests in your car. You cannot have that kind of coverage, which in a sense selfishly protects you, without having what's called bodily injury coverage, which is a more altruistic coverage because it's going to protect people that you may harm if you cause an accident, people that you don't know. People that are in the other car, people that you've never met before, people that you likely would never meet again in your entire lifetime. You have to have bodily injury coverage to protect those people. That's the public policy in Florida. If you're not going to protect other people, you can't protect yourself with UM. But for two very strong reasons, I recommend that you have UM coverage. First of all, you should be protecting other people if you can afford it. Insurance policies are always a matter of what can you afford. If you can afford it, you should be protecting other people. There's no reason not. Secondly, you must protect you and your family or anybody in your car because Florida does not require that the other drivers out there on the road protect you. So It's also very important to understand that when your insurance agent tells you that you have full coverage, but you've bought the basic minimum of just property damage and personal injury protection, that you are not fully covered. You're absolutely not fully covered. And that is the trap that most people fall into. They buy a policy, they hear the term fully covered, and I can understand why now. When I was a young driver, that's exactly what I did. I bought the least expensive policy. I was told I was fully covered, I had everything I needed, and I walked out the door. Now, knock on wood, knocking on my head, I never was involved in an accident. And so I never needed the coverage to pay for somebody else's injuries, and I never needed the coverage to pay for my injuries because I've just not been involved in an accident. But I know from personal experience that it could happen today. It can happen tomorrow. My friend that was involved in an accident last weekend had no idea as she was making her way home from an errand that she was going to be involved in an accident. Nobody does. I mean, how many people leave their home on a given day saying, you know what, I'm gonna drive my car into another car today. The purpose of insurance is to protect yourself in the future for things that you don't know are going to happen, but very well can happen. And if you take anything away from this discussion this morning, understand that you can't fix it after the accident. You cannot change your insurance coverage after an accident. So be very proactive about it. Call me. If you want to call into the radio show, 877-850-8585. I am happy to answer these questions on the show. As a matter of fact, I would love to answer these questions on the show. If you prefer to speak to me in private, because this is kind of a personal issue, how much money are you willing to spend or can you spend on different coverages? That can sometimes be personal. Then dial 833-VASTOLA. That goes right to my cell phone. 833-827-8652. Keep in mind, and this was a real shocker to my friends when I sat down with them and had some discussions about the what ifs. You can add bodily injury coverage to a policy relatively inexpensive. But here's the real shocker. Let's say you have bodily injury coverage on your policy already, but you only have $10,000 of coverage, which is the very least amount of coverage you can buy. It's a very nominal amount of money. It's a very nominal amount of coverage. To increase the protection on your policy from $10,000 of coverage to $100,000 of coverage, which is a $90,000 increase, it's probably going to cost you maybe $25 every 6 months. That's possibly the difference. Now, of course, it depends on your age and your gender and that kind of thing, the overall risk that you are to an insurance company. But keep in mind that the amount that it would take to increase your coverages is so incredibly insignificant that their responses are funny. Sometimes they're shocked. Sometimes they're angry. Sometimes people get angry when they find out how inexpensive it would have been to increase coverage from 10 to 100,000 or from 100,000 to 250,000. And the reason is, oftentimes, we're talking about these coverages in the context of uninsured motorists, which is the amount of money that they get if they're involved in an accident and somebody hurts them, and if their claim is worth that extra money. I say to people, well, you've only got the 100,000 in UM, and that's all the insurance company is going to give you, absent any allegations of bad faith. And I say to them, if you had spent the extra, $25 to $30 every 6 months, you could have had $250,000 of coverage. It's a difference of $150,000 of benefit that could have gone into their pocket that they just don't know about. And for such an insignificant amount of money, 10 people out of 10 tell me after the fact, oh, I would have spent that extra $30. Well, of course you would have. It's $30 every 6 months. It's not even $30 a month. So know these things, because finding out about them after the fact is not the way you want to find out about it. 877-850-8585, that's the number to call into the show. I have a couple different cases that I wanted to share with you guys before my show is over. And I'm having a hard time tracking the time while I'm talking. Let me see what time we've got here, 7:51. So there's a case in the Florida Law Weekly, and I want to pull this up very quickly. It's out of the 3rd DCA, which is Miami. It's a case involving some European foreigners, individual named Plazenko and then they sued a company called Pier Marine Interiors. Essentially, the crux of the case is what's called Florida's long arm statute. It's when the analysis Florida courts have to utilize to find out if they're going to have jurisdiction over the parties in a given lawsuit. And a court cannot exercise jurisdiction over a party if that particular defendant has never exposed himself or herself, or if it's a company itself, to the jurisdiction of the court. And that's exactly what happened here. There is a Florida statute that sets forth when Florida courts have jurisdiction over a certain person and when they don't. Because you have to understand that Florida courts have the ultimate ability to render what's called a judgment. And in the civil side of things, as opposed to the criminal side, on the criminal side, judgment is, okay, you're going to jail and this is the number of years that you're going to go to jail. That's judgment in a criminal court. Judgment in a civil court is a civil judgment, obviously, and that typically is for a monetary value. Sometimes it's not money, but most oftentimes it's money. And when a civil judgment is rendered against a defendant in Florida, that judgment is saying, okay, defendant, you owe the plaintiff this much money. But if the defendant has never been to Florida, has never done business in Florida, has no connections to the state of Florida, then a Florida court cannot exercise jurisdiction over that defendant to say, hey, defendant, you owe this plaintiff X amount of dollars. That's called having jurisdiction over the parties. And the Florida long arm statute is what's utilized to determine whether or not a court is going to have jurisdiction over a defendant. And that's exactly what happened in this case, which is a really interesting analysis if you're a lawyer and you're into this kind of stuff. But ultimately, you've got two European individuals who formed a corporation in Florida to do what a company they owned in Europe already did, and that was to make renovations to very large yachts and cruise ships. They said to themselves, we're doing so well in Europe, let's open up a United States branch. And they happened to do that in Miami. They came to Miami, they hired Miami lawyers, they formed a corporation, and they tried to land some big deals with the cruise ship industry, but they just were not able to make it work. And there was some dispute among the individuals. A lawsuit was filed in Miami at a Florida state court, and the defendant said, I'm sorry, court, but you don't have jurisdiction over me because I've never availed myself to the state of Florida. And the trial court disagreed and said, no, I have jurisdiction over you. And so the defendant filed an appeal, and the appeal so far, because this is the third DCA, now this might go up to the Florida Supreme Court, I don't know. The chances of that happening are not very good because the Florida Supreme Court doesn't take many cases, but it could go to the Florida Supreme Court. But the third DCA, which is Dade County and Monroe County down in the Keys, for appellate purposes, ruled, Florida trial court, you have no jurisdiction over this defendant because this man and this company specifically, they never did any business. They never landed any deals, and so they never did any business here. So essentially that was the finding of that case. And again, I just found it very interesting. So if anybody has any questions about that case, would like more detail about it, because it's a very thorough opinion. You know, the analysis of the long arm statute is really very well thought out, but I'm not going to bore everyone with the details because maybe you're not as interested as I am in that kind of a thing. Sharina, how are we doing on time? 3 minutes. Okay. Well, that gives me enough time to talk about maybe one more case that I found, and this one was just kind of shocking to me. And this is a true case. I didn't make this up. This case has to do with guardianship of minors, and this is based out of the 5th DCA. So this is in the center of the state. The basic greater Orlando area is the 5th DCA. But what happened was, this is really shocking. You have a mother and a father and 2 kids. Well, one night, and it actually in the opinion tells you the night, it says early January of 2019, the mother killed the father in the home. And so what the mother did before she was arrested is she called her sister in Ohio and said, can you come down here and get the kids because I might be going away. That was before she was arrested. Subsequently, she is in fact arrested. She's prosecuted, or possibly being prosecuted for murder, because this only happened in 2019. So it's entirely possible that she's still in the process of being prosecuted. But ultimately, the trial court granted the guardianship to a family friend that lives in the area, who lives in Winter Park, Florida, which is where I actually grew up. I went to Winter Park High School. And the family members from Ohio filed a lawsuit to challenge where the children should grow up and who should be the guardian, because they're saying, we are the choice of the mother. Well, the trial court said, I'm sorry, but I am going to defer to the statute and what is in the best interest of the ward. Now understand, the ward in this particular instance is the kids. The kids become the wards of the state. Ultimately, the appellate court said, trial court, you were wrong. You should not have been focusing on the best interest of the kids. You should have been focusing on what the mother wanted. I found that to be a crazy result because, mind you, the mother had just been found well, not guilty yet perhaps, but had just murdered the dad. So why she should have a say, I have no idea. I'll talk more about that case. Hey, listen, continued prayers for my dad, please. My dad is still in a coma on a ventilator. We love him very much, Dad. We're praying for you every day. Thank you all for listening. I hope everyone has a great weekend and a fantastic week. Talk to you soon.